since I started the International Futures Forum, I'm responsible for all of this. So that would be, well, back in 2001. I guess the discussions would have been going on during 1999-2000. So my background is in policy making. I used to be in the British Foreign Office, the Foreign Service, and I spent 11 years there, thinking that policy making in government was the place to be to shift the world in a positive direction. I still believe that, but the reality was that what I experienced there was actually quite a degree of cynicism and resignation about the truth that I still believe lies in that statement. So, lots of good, intelligent, well-intentioned people really struggling to do good work. So I left. I went into the world of the think tank, so policy making outside government, which I thought might be a bit more creative and possibly more influential. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I spotted that Scotland, with a change of government in London, was likely to get its own parliament and a set of new devolved institutions of government. And I thought, that really will be a place to make shift happen and to use policy to all its progressive potential. So I moved to Scotland, set up a think tank there to advise the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government, and I discovered that policy making outside government, even with a whole new set of institutions and lots of money and contacts in a small country and a history of creative endeavour and all of the things that you, especially John, know as a native of the place, still very difficult to shift anything really address these intractable challenges and social issues. So I started asking around amongst policymakers and others, what am I missing? And one by one they began to fall into the same pattern and say, well, actually, now you mention it, we're experiencing the same sense of frustration. And so what came out of those discussions was a new hypothesis that maybe we just don't understand how the world works anymore. And we're using a set of outdated models and mindsets to grasp a very different world. And so, of course, our policy is going to be ineffective. So our hypothesis has become, actually, the real challenge now is to figure out how to take effective action in a world we don't understand and can't control. Unfortunately, one of the sponsors of the think tank I'd set up in Scotland was looking over my shoulder at that time and said, that's very interesting, Graham, that's the world that we live in. What's the answer? How do you take more effective action in a world we don't understand and can't control? I said, I don't know. I've only just discovered that that's the question. They said, well, how will you find the answer? So I put my head together with some other folks, and they said, well, what we need to do is to bring together distinguished experts from many disciplines and many parts of the world who accept that that's the challenge and work on that as the challenge for 2 years. And that's what we did. So that was 2001 and 2002. So some time ago now. And we've continued, we're now in the 12th year of our 2-year project, because it's only recently that I've had the confidence to say this. I think we did find the answer. We did find out how to take effective action in a world we don't understand and can't control. And over the years, we've stayed in existence because more and more people have come to us saying, we're in a fix. We don't know we're struggling to be effective in this world. Can you help? And our answer has always been yes. And so some of the people we've now worked with for 7 or 8 years, even longer. And I learned some of this from Maureen, that the essential part of this that I learned or picked up from Maureen and others has been, the importance of the human system. And that once we got into a relationship with some of these folks that promised hope, that was a relationship for life. In order to conduct that relationship responsibly, we have to stay in existence and stay in that relationship for good. And so that's why we're still here, we're still working.
Wow, that sounds like quite a long but very interesting journey to an exciting place, Graham. Yeah, thank you for that description. I really appreciate it.
And one day I'm going to write another book which is going to be called What They Didn't Teach Me in Policy School. Most of what I've learned over the last 12 years was you do not learn as a policymaker. But I think we need to.
Yeah, so some vital things you've learned along the way.
Yeah.
Well, Maureen, maybe I could ask you, how did you get involved in this think tank then, the International Futures Forum?
Well, as some of you know, that I came to the United States in 1969, and I came as a biologist, and I was hoping that through biology I'd be able to somehow help create the conditions for a better world for people who were excluded or were suffering. And I went through a real existential crisis. I got very sick, and as I started to come out of the illness, I had some insights into how the whole approach of science, which was very much an approach of let's fix it, command and control, linear thinking, figure out what's wrong and fix it, was all very important. But at the core of why we were doing all this were human beings. And I realized at that point, I'd been born in England, grew up in England, went to university in England. Throughout that whole time, the human being that I was had been pretty much ignored. And I had pretty much ignored the being of other people. So in this sort of existential moment, I came to the realization that at the core of the question of how to build a better world was the question of how to expand human beings, how to build better human beings, how to build better relationships, how to build better systems that support human growth and development. So at about that time, I left science and went into psychology. And out of sheer luck, I mean, it really was sheer luck, I went to a university that allowed students to choose the teachers that they wanted to work with from anywhere on the planet. And as long as you could convince them that they wanted to work with you, you could have them as part of your learning team. And out of complete cheek, pretty much Yorkshire working class gritty cheek, I wrote to Carl Rogers in California and I said, hey, I've got this project that I'm doing and I'd like to have you as my teacher. Completely assuming that he would say no. But he didn't. He said yes. And he said, sounds interesting to me. Why don't you come to California and we'll do some work together? And I mean, that's the kind of invitation that only comes to you once in a lifetime, right? So I did. I packed up my things and moved to California and started working with Carl, not so much on the client-centered approaches to therapy, because actually I wasn't that interested in being a therapist, partly because I felt completely incompetent since my background was all science. But I did start to get involved in these large groups, these large encounter groups, and began to understand that there was something going on in these groups that had to do with how do human beings create systems in which the people in them can become more fully human. How can we, so I began to be interested in the whole question of